Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of CVtv. Today we're live via Facebook and YouTube, and we're actually going to have an awesome show. Now, you guys know me from the workshops with my co-host David Dakin, but every now and then we actually have a show where we bring an expert to help us, answer questions for newbies and questions for advanced people. So today, I actually have I should call him my co-host because he's been on the show so many times that it's actually kind of fun to have him, Mike Paletta. And I'm going to bring Mike Paletta in. He doesn't need any introduction. Hey, Mike.
Hello, Carlos. Hello, everyone. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. It's been a while, man. How has been your year so far?
It's been interesting. Learned a lot. Changed the tank over from a saltwater tank that just didn't make it to a freshwater tank. So it's much more relaxing. Had a leak in a 40-gallon tank and just had a leak in one of my overflow boxes on the 600. So it's been an interesting, always something, as we say.
Yes, there is always something going on. It's like if there isn't, you're not looking for it, because it's there. So how's everything going down in Pennsylvania? I hear that there was a lot of snow a couple of days ago. I saw a post on Facebook with your flower garden covered in white.
Yeah, a week ago was in the last 3 days. We've had freeze warnings, so I've been covering up the flowers and stuff. And tonight's our last freeze, and then Monday it's going to be 80 again. So it's insane weather, but it's April in Pittsburgh, so that's what happens.
Yeah, I can relate. This is it's Chicago here. I'm in Chicago too, and it's the same thing. Last week it was perfect weather. This week is cold. We had below freeze warning overnight from last night, and I think we're having another one today or tonight. It is what it is. It's April. Anything in March, April, and part of May in the northern part of the United States, and it's all crazy. You can't rely on the weather.
Yeah, and the sad part is I have to constantly play with the heater or with the furnace or with the air conditioner because I try to keep the house at 70 degrees to keep the tanks perfect. If it goes up or below that, then there's always an issue. So it's one of the issues of spring and fall is that it's never steady. So you have to pay attention to what's going on.
Yes. Otherwise, the water quality goes down, which kind of brings us into the subject that we're going to be covering today about water testing, and go over your article. I know you recently released an article through the CoralVue blog site about water testing, which is kind of cool, and we'll get to that. But before we do that, I'm just going to say hello to a few people, because, we have to say hello. I got to say hello to Wendy. Thank you, Wendy, for being here. Let's see, Battle OCR is here. David Cohen is here, too, a good friend. So is Greg Carroll and many others. So thank you so much for watching. We are streaming live on YouTube as well as on Facebook. If you like the show, or if you have seen the show before, or this is your first time watching, welcome. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit that bell button, hit that little, like button, and then you will be notified right away whenever we go live for any show. It doesn't matter what show it is, you'll be notified, and you don't want to miss something like this, especially with Mike. Mike is a wonderful person, very knowledgeable, and you know what I like about Mike is that, Mike, you make everything simple. As a newbie, I understand what you're saying. You don't get too technical. You don't get too much high tech. You're talking to the people that, it's like me, that I just sometimes I don't understand. Just, it's easy for me to understand you, which is a great thing. And that's why we keep bringing you back,
Thanks. Yeah, I've actually, over the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of quote unquote technical experiments. And every time I do them, I get back to keeping things simpler, and it makes my life much easier.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be a science. It shouldn't be magic to keep a tank. It should be relatively simple and relatively easy, because then you're going to be more successful than if you have to constantly figure out different things and try to manipulate too many things at once. Makes it too difficult.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about your article, water testing, and why test water? What is it about water?
Well, as I put in the article on, and if you read it, I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself, but if you haven't, my first day in chemistry class, the professor walks to the front of the room, and there's 2 clear beakers sitting in the front. He takes a earthworm out, he drops it in the first one, it swims around and it climbs out of the beaker. He then takes it and sticks it in the second one. They're both clear beakers. It goes in the second one. Within seconds, it starts dissolving in the tank. and within a minute, there's nothing in there left of the worm. And he goes, what does this tell you, class? He goes, this first beaker was pure water. The second beaker was pure alcohol. And one of the guys in the class goes, you know what that says, Professor? If you drink alcohol, you'll never get worms.
Of course.
And amazingly, that person asking that question was former President George Bush. So that tells you all you need to know.
Okay.
No, but that was how I've always looked at my tanks, is that a lot of us, after you've done this for a while, you basically do the look at the tank, it looks good, I don't need to test the water trick, and that'll work for a while. But over time, a tank is not a static system. It's always dynamic. There's always things changing. Like in my own tank, one of the things that I look at in terms of over how successful and how the tank's doing is alkalinity consumption. Now, I use a Alkatronic to measure it, and I keep the amount of buffer that I'm adding constant. So if it suddenly drops or suddenly goes up, it tells me very quickly that either the corals are doing really well when the consumption starts to be higher, or that the tank isn't doing as well when the consumption becomes less. So it's an easy way to do that. Even though I have the Alkatronic, I still test alkalinity 3 times a week because I'm OCD and I don't trust electronics. So I always test everything multiple times.
As you should. I mean, that is a rule of thumb. I always tell people, you have a machine that is testing something, but it does not replace the human factor. And yes, testing alkalinity by hand with that little, the syringe and wiggling or jiggling the little vial, it's a pain in the butt, but it needs to be done. You know what? I would rather go through 10, 20 minutes of 20 seconds of pain in the butt than not know anything, trust the machine, and if the machine is wrong, then I'm going to go through days and months, possible months of frustration because the corals are turning brown or something like that. So always test the machines, either with another machine or do it manually.
Well, and also in terms of testing, the other thing you need to do is log what you're testing, so that if you see something change, go up or down, you have a baseline from which to base what's going on. Like in the early years of the hobby, we didn't even test for alkalinity the way we do now. We tested more for calcium because we thought calcium was more important. Now I test much more for alkalinity because that changes literally day to day. My calcium levels stay fairly stable, but my alkalinity can fluctuate a lot. And if my balling system isn't working, if the pump isn't working and it's not introducing enough alkalinity, I can see very quickly that the alkalinity is dropping. I know to check that and see what's going on. So by having a log and by checking things quickly, because alkalinity, if you have a big spike or you have a big drop, you may not see an effect on the corals that day. Oh, no. But a week, 2 weeks later, you might get RTN, STN because you stressed out the corals. So it's very vital that you check this very often and that you keep a log to try and keep things as stable as possible.
Exactly. And you know what? I usually, and I agree with you in terms of the alkalinity changing all the time, because my tank, it changes alkalinity. The consumption goes down 1 DKH in 1 day, in 12 hours, from the morning down to the evening. If I shut off my calcium reactor, the alkalinity will drop for about 1 to 1.5 DKH. That's how much consumption, and I'm sure people have a lot more consumption out there. But the one thing that you have to do is you have to make sure that you test constantly, because it's water quality. And yes, back in the days when, like Mike said, you could get away with testing calcium because we didn't know better, and we thought that, I remember the days of setting up a calcium reactor and not really testing alkalinity. All I was testing was calcium, not knowing that in fact calcium actually doesn't change. I have a handy dandy testing machine here that tests calcium and magnesium once a week, and trust me, they don't change. I don't need to test calcium and magnesium every 6 hours or every day. It doesn't change. But my alkalinity gets tested every few hours, and my my nitrates and phosphates get tested every single day, just for that, to maintain the stability. Because at the end of the day, the more stable you keep the tank water, the better your tank is going to take off. It's a fact.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, have become, by being home all the time, I've done a lot more testing than I ever did before. And in my mind, I finally gotten the tank more stable. And particularly in the last 3 months, when I pretty much quit doing experiments on the tank and letting things just settle in, I'm not changing the light schedule. I'm keeping the alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium levels stable. I'm not introducing anything new, really. I've had a lot better success. And I've also kept my hands out of the tank more because it is
Yes.
stable.
Yes, it is. It is amazing how much stability, and I always say that, Jeremy, our graphic designer, and I always talk about this, and it's like the number one job, my number one job is actually my only job is to keep water quality. If I can keep water quality stable, I've done my job. Everything else, it'll just happen in itself. But water quality, my number one job is to keep water quality. And that means, staying away from tinkering or adding too many chemicals too quickly or too slowly, kind of find that balance, that rhythm. But if I do my job at keeping my tank water stable, my corals will thank me by growing and being wonderful and colorful. That's pretty much it all comes down to. I mean, if you want to oversimplify things.
Well, one of the things that by finding the leak I had in the tank that I also now test daily, believe it or not, is salinity. The little 40 nano tank that's attached to the 500 into the frag tank downstairs was leaking, but it was leaking on the bottom, and there's a dehumidifier right underneath it. So it was leaking water right beside the dehumidifier. It was taking, and I was using an old refractometer that I hadn't calibrated, and I didn't realize that the alkalinity had gotten down to 32 in the tank. So obviously that was not good. Now I have a HANA checker that I check literally every morning and every night. One, if there's a big leak, I'm going to find it a lot quicker. And two, I've gotten a lot more stringent in trying to keep the salinity exactly at 35 all the time. And that has helped a lot in the tank. And a lot of people don't check their salinity, or they have the old box hydrometer or even the refractometer that they don't calibrate, or even the electronic Milwaukee one. If you don't zero it, it'll also screw up. All of these have flaws in them. There's no perfect way to test it unless you have the old glass one that you put in. The problem with that is everyone breaks the neck off.
Yeah, and that's the one I have. Actually, at the end of the day, that's the one I use. I ended up, because I had everything, as I had the electronic, I had the test one and everything. And it's like, and everybody was different. So at that point, I just broke down, bought a nice floating cylinder that I have like a 500 milliliter beaker, plastic beaker, because you don't want to use glass on glass. That would be very bad. So I recommend plastic because you're not looking for accuracy in the beaker. You just want the beaker to hold water. And then I put the little floating thing in there, and it tells me exactly what my salinity is. And it's old technology, but it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, that's right there, That's what I use. And the same thing as you. Sometimes, sometimes I've seen myself at 32. Sometimes I've gone down to 30. So now over the last few months, I've made a concerted effort to keep it at 35. Try to keep it at 35 as much as I possibly can. Just stability. And I mean, you can see my tank in here, and it's just it's rewarding me. I mean, I couldn't be happier with this tank, just by keeping it stable.
And I've also done that now when I do water changes. All the water matches exactly the salinity. It's amazing how little a change in that, when you do 50 or 100 gallon water change, can affect the tank. So I know everything is matched up perfectly. Alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and most importantly, salinity when I do my water changes. And I'm back to doing bi-weekly water changes.
That's exactly. Well, before we continue and get to actual questions, I want to say hello to Cindy Coral Gal, who is celebrating her 3rd week anniversary of keeping her hands off the tank. Can you believe that? 3 weeks. You get like you should get like a reward or something. I also want to say hello to Alex, and Aaron's Aquaculture is here too as well. So now let's go over things. Since we're talking about testing water, even as a professional, because I newbies out there, it's like newbies asking is like, how much time do you spend testing? How much time do you spend testing? So if a newbie says I have to spend, do you have to spend an hour testing things? Do you have to spend 5 minutes testing things? How much time do you think?
The interesting thing is the more you test, the faster and more efficient you get at it, because you remember, okay, I need to add 8 drops of this and 4 drops of this and do this. if you have to look it up and figure out where everything is, that kills a lot more time than doing it more regularly. I mean, I can knock off an alkalinity test in about 3 minutes. Calcium and magnesium probably take 5 minutes. So I do those twice a week. I do alkalinity 3 times a week. It may be a little bit more. Salinity, I just have to put the HANA checker in. Phosphate and nitrate. Nitrate, you just have to wait 5 minutes, and phosphate, you have to wait 3 minutes. So typically what I do is I start those tests, do my other tests, and by the time I'm done, those tests are ready to be read. If I do 5 to 10 minutes of testing 3 or 4 times a week, that's probably as much as I do.
And you know, the trick about that too, and it's like people tend to forget, is that if you spend the time testing, that means less time dealing with problems and issues due to the fact that you didn't test, right?
Yeah, anything you can do that's preventative saves you an infinite amount of time, money, and grief. If you can prevent something from happening, like if you're seeing your alkalinity is suddenly spiking, you know, suddenly going up a lot, either something's wrong with your calcium reactor or with your how you're adding it, or something is happening within the tank. So you know you need to get on that and figure out what's going on very quickly. That same thing with like magnesium. I know people don't test for magnesium very often. And one of the interesting things in talking with a friend of mine who's a chemist is that in looking at his magnesium, he kept adding it and adding it. And as much as he added, it was seemingly sucking it up. And he couldn't figure out why, as much magnesium as he added, he could never get over 1400. The reason was he was adding nothing but magnesium chloride. You also have to add magnesium sulfate because however the test kit is designed, it measures magnesium sulfate more specifically than does magnesium chloride. Yes. As a result, if you don't add the sulfate, either it's precipitating out or it's not being measured. So you have to have both in balance. But I never knew that before. So I had done the same thing where I had added like a pound of magnesium chloride and I got no rise in the magnesium level in the tank. I added a small portion of magnesium sulfate. All of a sudden I was at 1500.
Yeah, and you know what? And then back in the day, I don't know if they do it anymore, but most of the online retailers used to sell you half and half. Remember, they used to do that. You had to purchase both and then mix them up and add them both, sulfate and chloride. Nowadays, I think they do it as a package. Either they do it for you or something, you know. So you just have to make sure. So everybody, remember, you have to add both. Otherwise, when you measure, you're not going to get the reading. You know.
Yeah.
I know that.
I mean, but no, they don't tell you this on the package, or they don't tell you this anywhere that I've been able to read, that you have to make sure that your sulfates are adequate in order to measure magnesium properly.
Yes. So okay, so you're testing alkalinity, you test salinity, you test calcium, magnesium, potassium, pH, nitrate, and phosphates. That's pretty much what you go around, right?
I also test strontium, and there's one iodine test kit out there, but I don't think it's very accurate, so I quit doing that. And then I also do ICP testing every month or every 3 months, depending on how the tank's doing.
You know, I think somebody asked us, how much stock should we put in a hobby grade test kits? Is it really giving us true parameters? You know, the thing about it is, and you know, Mike, what do you think? But unless you are testing something in a lab condition, which is pristine, then you're going to have some kind of contamination. But at the same time, in our fish tanks, in our reef tanks, we don't need to be that much lab grade accurate, right? So we just don't need an exact number, but we need to know it's not about the number right now, it's about the number today, the number tomorrow, the number after tomorrow, the day from yesterday, and looking at that stability, correct?
Right, it's not the precise number, but you want to be within a ballpark. You don't want to be, your alkalinity is at 8 and your test kit shows it's at 10, or you're at 6 and it's at 8. That's not good. But if you're at 8.5 and it's showing 8.3, there's not going to be much of a difference. But by what I do is I have basically 2 or 3 test kits for everything that I measure. I run an ELOS test kit, I run a Salifert, and I run a NIOS. And I test them just to see how well they compare with each other. Sometimes they're very close. Sometimes they're off the wall. And when they do that, then I do multiple tests of all of them just to see. Then I have a third one, you know, oftentimes a third one to see to break the tie if something's really off.
Exactly, exactly. So keep in mind, people, you're not chasing numbers in terms of like Mike said, if it's if your alkalinity is 8.3 and the test kit says 8.4, it's okay. You know, it's the trick is tomorrow, is it going to be 8.4 or around that? The day after tomorrow, is it going to be around that area? You want stability over long periods of time and not just concentrate into a single number, because a single number is just a snapshot of what happens right now. And the name of the game is stability. So if you're at
Yeah,
8,
one of the worst things you can do is chase numbers. I mean, your alkalinity is at 8 and you want it 8.5, so you bump it up real fast. That's a horrible thing to do. Take a week to bring it up to where you want it to be. Take as long as you can, because the coral, it didn't get to that number overnight. You shouldn't bring it back up to that number overnight. I mean, I could tell you countless number of hobbyists and friends of mine that have wiped out large numbers of corals because they did things way too fast. So with anything, take it slow, keep things as stable as you can, and resist the urge to go, oh my God, it's this bad, I got to change it immediately. Like, obviously, if the tank's at 95 degrees, you want to bring that down relatively quickly. But other than temperature, none of these other parameters really need to be changed or improved immediately. You can always take a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week. It's going to be a lot better for the tank than if you do something really fast.
Exactly. Last thing you want to do is the coral's already shocked because it spiked to that point, and now you don't want to shock it again by bringing it down. Or if the alkalinity got up, it most likely sometimes, unless you dumped in a whole bunch of of alkalinity powder or liquid, it got to that point slowly. So bring it down slowly. Don't shock it. Another thing that I'm going to say is, people tend to say, I keep my tank at 8 DKH. That is virtually impossible to do. You can't not keep a tank at 8 all the time. So you should say, I keep my tank between 7 3/4 and 8 1/4. And during the day, that will fluctuate. If it fluctuates that point, it's not a big deal. It actually is going to be fine. My tank fluctuates between 8.25 and 7.5, sometimes even 7.75 or 7.5, and it's fine. So don't go chasing an exact number. You're looking for a range.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about the Alkatronic. When it shows you the graphing, it shows you how stable the line is, and there's always some fluctuation, and you can always change how wide that fluctuation is. Obviously, you don't want it like this, but you want it more, a little bit of fluctuation.
Right, exactly.
As I said, more stable it can be, the less fluctuation, the better, but there's no way you can have it constant all the time, because the alkalinity uptake changes over time. It's, less at night, obviously, more during the day. So you need to adjust things. I mean, on some of the better high-end calcium reactors, they almost shut down at night because they know there's not a lot of buffer going, or a need for buffer going in at night. Also, if you add more CO2 at night, it can be problematic because your pH will tend to drop. And that's one of the other things, actually, when we get into testing, that I've gotten back to looking at a lot more aggressively is pH and the factors that affect pH, because it has a significant effect on how fast your corals grow. If you have a low pH, they don't grow as well as when you have a higher pH.
Yes, correct. Now, for those of you that are saying testing, oh my God, it's, I can't do that testing where you're shaking your hand and then injecting and all that. So I'm not, this is something that is not a plug. You can buy it. You don't have to buy it or anything like that. But I was one of those people that we have this little auto aqua stir. And I don't know if you've ever used it, Mike, but I was one of those people that I looked at the stir and I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy that. Why would I buy that? I can just use my hand and put the syringe and everything. And I tell you, then I got one through work, obviously. And then once I used it, Mike, I don't want to use anything again, because it's so easy to be able to I don't have to concentrate on shaking and make sure that the drop falls in the water and doesn't fall on the side of the vial. So it's stirring at the right speed, and all I have to do is concentrate on dropping very slowly, and then the color change. And it makes testing so much quicker, and I think more accurate, because you're concentrating on less things. You're concentrating on 2 things instead of 3. So, it's just a little thing you can find at CoralVue.com. If you don't want to buy it, don't buy it. I know some people might say, that's an overkill. That I was one of them. But once you have it, trust me, you'll just want it, because it just makes your life so much easier. FYI. So
yeah, no, I haven't tried it. may down the future, but that's just another piece of equipment in my house.
Yeah, it's a tiny little thing though, Mike. It's like this footprint, this size, and it's a small thing, and it's just a little thing that it's got a battery and it's got a little magnetic stir, and all you got to do is put the syringe in there. It actually makes life easier. Maybe I'll send you one of those, and then you'll check it. You can check it out. Okay. So what are the elements that you test the most? Obviously, alkalinity is one of them, and as you mentioned, pH. What else do you test the most often, and what do you test the least often?
The least often I test is strontium, because the easiest way for me to tell if my strontium levels are good is the coral and algae is taken off on the glass. Then after that is calcium. By the same token, if the coral and algae on the glass starts to show white in the center, typically means my calcium has dropped below 420. I now try to keep my calcium at about 450, because I found at 450, the corals grow significantly faster than they do if you keep it at 410 or 420. So that's the other one. Magnesium, I keep it between 1400 and 1450, simply because that keeps my algae levels down. For whatever reason, if my magnesium level drops to 1300 or 1350, I start getting turf algae and other problematic algae. So I keep that there. I also now test for potassium. There's a couple potassium test kits out there. I try to keep that at around 450 to 470. The reason I do for that is coral coloration improves dramatically if you keep your potassium levels higher rather than lower. I had been keeping them at around 400. I read and talked to a few people that had been keeping it higher. I bumped it up to 450 to 470 range, and some of the coloration of the corals bumped up dramatically. All of these, none of this changes overnight. Adding any of these or improving any of these is not going to change your tank overnight. Keep that in mind.
Yes.
With potassium, it took about 3 months till I really started to see an improvement. With magnesium, it'll take about 2 weeks once you get the magnesium levels at the proper levels for the algae to start to go down. For calcium, in order to start to see the growth, you have to have your calcium levels up, but you also have your pH levels up. That will take a month to 6 weeks to start to see an effect. Nothing is going to dramatically improve your tank overnight. You can, however, wipe out your tank overnight, which I have done and which most people I know have done by doing something stupid. Avoid doing something stupid or doing something fast or doing something rash, because the penalty for that in a coral tank, the coral gods do not smile on speed. They smile on patience. So do not think you can do anything fast in your tank and walk away and go, oh, this is going to be great. No. And anytime you change anything, whether it's the light cycle or duration or intensity or the flow in the tank, and you sit in your chair and go, oh, this is going to be great, I'm going to see something dramatic, you're wasting your time, and all you're going to do is get mad and frustrated with yourself. Figure if you do it in the spring, by the time summer rolls around, you might just start to see some effect of it. So give yourself a quarter or a season to start to see effects of things. I mean, I read these things on Facebook and on some of the other sites where people go, oh, I switched it on this and I saw an effect in 3 or 4 days. I've never seen a good effect in 3 or 4 days. I've never seen the corals just suddenly blow up in growth. I've seen things grow faster in a week or 2 or 3 weeks. But for a coral that grows, 1 to 3 centimeters a month, it's not going to grow 2 inches in a week. If it does, call me. Let me know how this magic works, because I've never seen it.
Yes, I've seen. You know what? It takes 6 months to get some nice coral growth. It takes 12 hours to see it all go down with RTN. I mean, it is how bad it is, how quickly things can go down, and so please.
Yeah, in 1986, I gave my first lecture in Toronto, and during that first lecture, I told them, I said, as far as I know, nothing good ever happens fast in a reef tank. Only bad things happen fast in a reef tank. And there was a guy there who I had been talking to, and I told him that I had been dosing iodine in the tank to try and keep things stable. And I was adding, when I had like a 60-gallon tank, and I told him I was adding like 2 drops of Lugol's iodine. Well, in his mind, he thought, well, if 2 drops are good, 20 milliliters would probably be even better. So he put 20 milliliters in his tank, went to work, and came home, and his whole tank was snow white. And this were soft corals. These weren't even SPS corals. So don't think more is better. Most of the
Yeah.
things that we add to our tank I worked in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology for over 35 years. There's a therapeutic window. Therapeutic window is there's a low level, a bottom, that below that there's a negative effect, but there's also a high level where above that there's also a negative effect. Where you want to be is in that middle in between. That's where the good things are going to happen in your tank. You want to hit that therapeutic window with everything. And now there's enough documentation of everything that you should have a pretty good idea of where those numbers are. But one of the things you got to understand, every single tank is different. The nutrients in your tank have an effect on the buffer calcium and magnesium levels, how quickly they're consumed. What I have found is if you have high level of nutrients, high phosphate, high nitrate, you typically can do a little bit better or need to be a little bit more aggressive with your alkalinity, your calcium, and your magnesium. By the same, if those levels are low, then you should have slightly lower levels and you get better results that way. You can't switch them and the corals get used to it. But over time, I've just experienced better effects with high nutrients, higher alkalinity, buffer, and calcium, low nutrients, lower levels of those.
Yes, exactly. So keep in mind, so it's documented on many boards. If you're running a low nutrient tank, you have to keep your alkalinity on the low end. If you have low nutrients and you let your alkalinity go high, probably about anything above 8 or 8.5, you're probably looking, you're poking the lion. You're going to poke the lion. So you got to keep it low. Now, Mike, one of the biggest things that for newbies now is that nano tanks are very, very common nowadays. So for those people that have small tanks, what's the importance of testing in a small tank? Is it more important to test things when you have a small tank than a larger tank? You know, what is it? Just because you have a smaller tank doesn't mean you have to test less, or does that? What's the relation in that?
For when I had a nano tank that was on its own, my nano tank now is a 40-gallon nano tank. It was a 29-gallon nano tank. The corals grew so fast, I moved it to a 40. It's tied into the filtration system for the 500, and it has a 120-gallon sump, so it's all interconnected. So I get away with a lot more than you can if you typically have a nano tank. If you have a nano tank that's on its own, I would personally, when I had it, I was testing it every day, and I was doing a water change of 50% once a week, simply because bad things seem to accumulate in a nano tank a lot faster. Because if you're like me, typically you put in way more bio load than you should in a nano tank. I mean, I put in way too much bio load in a 500-gallon tank. So in a nano tank, it's just totally out of control. So, I mean, unless you keep a really small quantity of animals, particularly fish, you have to do testing very often, and you have to do water changes, in my opinion, far more often than I have done in a bigger tank. It's just to keep the stability and just to keep everything going.
Yeah,
growth is often a nano tank far easier.
things can go bad. Things can go bad fast in a nano tank because there's less volume and there's less of forgiveness. You know, larger tanks, changes do happen, not that they happen very fast, but they do happen a little bit slower than they happen on a nano tank. So yes, keep in mind, just because you have a nano tank doesn't mean that you get to test less. You know, there's an argument that it's easier to keep a larger tank than a smaller tank.
Any tank is as easy to keep as the amount of time you're going to spend and how much your OCD kicks in for you to manage the tank. I mean, I have seen beautiful tanks from 1-gallon vase tanks to 1,000-gallon tanks, and the telling factor of how successful they were was how meticulous and how much time the people spent making sure everything was stable.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds simple, but if you spend the time and the effort, the tank will pay you back by looking beautiful and the corals growing. If you neglect it, you can neglect it somewhat. But when I say neglect it, you don't look at it, you just throw in random amounts of food, you don't pay attention to the parameters, there's going to be a problem over time. But if you put the time into it, you do the testing and you do the water changes, neither of which any of us like, we'll admit that. I mean, there's 3 things we all despise in the hobby. 1 is water changes, 2 is water testing, 3 is quarantining and dipping. We all hate those 3 things, but those all 3 go a long way toward your long-term success in the hobby.
Yes, exactly. So you are watching CVtv live on Facebook and YouTube, and we are covering water testing for newbies and advanced. If you like the show, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button or hit that bell or hit that like, and you'll be notified right away whenever we go live. I'd like to say hello to several people. I have Le Cichlid Reef as well, Farm Frags, Ryan Nash, Beebs Reef is here as well. Welcome, guys. Henry Denning is here as well. Thank you guys for coming and showing and joining us. So good to see you. All right, Mike, you in your article you covered ICP testing. No, can you um, uh, can you tell us why ICP testing is important in difference between ICP testing and the regular test that I buy on the at the local pet shop?
ICP testing to me is beneficial for two things. One, if you're having a problem in your tank and you can't figure out what's causing it, ICP testing can give you a idea of what's going on. Like this tank behind me that I've changed over from a saltwater tank to a freshwater tank always was problematic. One of the problems was I had a heater in there that never really had to come on because the temperature stayed relatively stable. Unfortunately, I cracked the heater at some point, and it was a high-end heater, and it leaked tungsten into the water.
Oh.
Now, you shouldn't have any tungsten in your water. I couldn't figure out why the corals were dying. What they would do is they would sit, they would stabilize, they would never encrust, and then they would just very gradually over 2 or 3 months, they would just fade and perish. And it was frustrating because it didn't matter what corals there were, whether they were soft corals, stony corals, all corals did that over time. So I did all the testing. I finally sent it to an ICP test that measured a lot of the heavy metals. And what they found was that the tungsten level in the tank was 1,600 times what it should be. They said, and when I talked to the owner, I said, what could be causing tungsten? He said, do you have a high-end heater? I said, yeah. I said, but it never comes on. He goes, check it. I bet it's cracked. Well, it was cracked all along the bottom, and it had slowly leached tungsten in probably for a year. So I obviously removed that, put in heavy metal remover. The tank did okay, but I still could never get the tungsten out of the rock or anything else. So that's one of the reasons why this tank was changed over after 4 years. But without ICP testing, I never would have known about tungsten. I never would have known about the heater. And that's why most of the people I know do ICP testing for that, and to also tell you what some of the trace elements levels are, so you can balance them, because certain corals do better when certain levels are at the right levels. Case in point, Goniopora. Goniopora likes relatively high manganese levels. There's no test kit for manganese.
Yes.
So once a quarter, I send in an ICP test just to see what my manganese levels are, so that my gars, even though I feed them, even though they're doing well, I have found that if my manganese levels drop to 0, they start to pull back and retract their polyps, and they don't do as well. I know at that point, time to send in a test, and then there's a calculator that Reef Moonshiners has online, and you can go in, plug in your manganese level, and see how much manganese to add to the system. And as soon as I do that, voila, the Gonioporas perk up again.
Yeah,
and
we were just
for that for basically 17 different things, 17 different trace elements that you can look at adding. Some of us don't want to do that. Some of us do water changes to add the trace elements. But if you have a specific coral that's not thriving, you can look at a specific trace element to see if it has an effect on that coral.
That's great. I have a Goniopora there that I've had for a long time. I bought it when it was like about 1/2 inch, and now it's 7 inches diameter when it's closed. And again, it's just the manganese. Now I add Aquaphor stuff in there that has all the things in there. And yes, I have. There's Jeremy, our graphic designer, who puts a Goniopora in his tank, and nothing happens, and it eventually just kind of bleaches out and dies. And in my tank, they just take off completely. So, is it safe to say most of the times people resort to ICP when they're trying to fix a problem? They're trying to troubleshoot a problem, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also benefit to testing when everything is going right. When the tank is doing really, really, really well, everything is growing really well, you should also send your ICP testing so you have a base to what seems to work for your tank and try to keep the levels at that point, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's nice to have a fallback position, go, okay, what's causing a problem? But it's also nice to have a baseline to say, okay, the tank's doing great, the colors are good. What's my baseline for all of these? So the next time when you do have a problem or things don't look quite as good, you can test and go, okay, my potassium level's down. I've been adding it, but apparently they're consuming it faster. You know,
Exactly.
little things like that make a big difference over the long run.
So, which comes down to the answer of how often should you do an ICP test? You know, you can't really put a schedule. You know, you do it when you can, and you do it when you feel like you have to. Either you're having a problem or the tank is really good. You know, that's where you do it. I mean, there's no set schedule that you should do it every single month, because it might change.
Now, most people do it until they get things stable and things are doing well. Then a lot of people do it like once every quarter, because things aren't going to change that fast as long as you're keeping on top of everything, and particularly the big parameters. The trace elements shouldn't suddenly go to 0 overnight if you're keeping things stable. And you also should be looking at your tank for 5 minutes a day to go, okay, everything looks good, but I'm having a problem here, or I'm looking at that there. I mean, one of the best tests you can do is sit in front of your tank for 10 minutes, feed the fish, get them used to your being there, and see what's going on. Because you always find things that you didn't expect to see. You may find a fish picking at a coral that you didn't expect. You may find something spawned in your tank that you didn't expect that's problematic. You may see something come out that you didn't even know you had. There's a zillion different reasons that one of your tests you should do is 10 minutes of enjoying the tank and looking at it.
It's you know what, sitting and reading your tank has become a lost art because of all the machinery and all the things that are going on. So make sure that, like Mike said, sit in there and watch your tank. Usually you can spot little corals that will react to certain changes, like a Montipora on the left of the tank. If your alkalinity is low, you'll notice that Montipora is not looking so well. Or maybe the purple on this coral, if my potassium or my phosphates are high, it starts to turn brown. You start reading your tank, and that's a lost art. So anybody, you're watching CVtv Live with Mike Paletta and your host Carlos. We're covering water testing. If you like the show, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button, and then also hit the bell or the like. You know, we always appreciate the likes. It makes us want to do more shows, and also it'll notify you that there is a show going on. Now, in the next part of the show, we're going to talk about tips on water testing, and you know, that you wrote on your article. But before we do that, let's have a word from our sponsor. Welcome back. You're watching live streaming at CoralVue CVtv with Mike Paletta and my name Carlos, and we're talking about water testing. So Mike, on your article, you also wrote things about tips, recommendations, and one of the biggest recommendations you had is to keep a diary or keep a log of things. Why is that important?
As with the ICP testing, it gives you a baseline from which to start with, and it gives you an idea if things are in balance or aren't in balance. And I mean, you list all the numbers, but one of the other things you should list is, okay, I'm seeing this coloration on this coral. I added this new coral. You should keep a log of not only all your parameters, but also any changes you've made to the tank. I changed the lighting cycle. The temperature that's one of the other things you got to test for is your temperature, because particularly this time of year, it can fluctuate a lot as the weather changes and you don't turn your air conditioning on quick enough, or you have to put your furnace back on. And bumping temperatures, people tend to neglect that a 2 or 3 degree swing in the temperature in the tank every day is a relatively big swing. When you're out diving on a reef, the corals typically are in relatively stable water temperature-wise, and it's not the same in a reef tank. So that's one of the other things you want to do is also on your testing, put what your water temperature is. I mean, a lot of us keep the water a little cooler in the summer or in the winter and a little warmer in the winter. I do the opposite. I keep my tank warmer in the winter, so in case there's a power outage or anything else, it takes longer for the water temperature to come down. And I keep the tank cooler in the summer so that if the power would shut off, it doesn't overheat too quickly. So I do have a big generator. I have a 400 amp generator that would run the tank, but I still worry about that kind of, something which should happen if I'm not here.
All right, so
a record for baseline, but also to see how you compare with other tanks. I mean, it gives you numbers to say, okay, I've been at 8.5 alkalinity. Suddenly I'm at 8.0. Then I'm at 7.5. And none of the other parameters have changed. What's different on this tank?
Right. So, yeah. So make sure you keep a log. If anything, you look at history. You look at what happened yesterday. You look at what happened the week before. And again, going back to the ICP testing, what were the parameters, or what was the entire week where your tank was doing really well? If your tank was really doing well, again, things happen slowly. So look at what happened the week before or 2 weeks before and see what was going on that made your tank look so good. And then if your tank is going downhill for whatever reason or something's happening, look at what happened a couple of days ago or a week ago, and that'll give you kind of a good window, a good indication of what was going on. So let
me add one thing. Typically, your whole tank won't go downhill. Typically, there'll be some kind of marker corals that will tend to do worse as the tank starts to do it. Acropora tenuis and spathulata are two of the more difficult ones to keep. And if the parameters suddenly change or something's wrong, those are the ones that will start to deteriorate first, versus typically the milliporas and torts get worse later. But
yes, they're hardier.
Once you see a few starting to do this, that's when it's nice to have a background and go, okay, this and this are not where they were when this coral was thriving. I have a baseline from which to judge why these corals are no longer thriving.
Yes, exactly. So logging is always a key. A key is always, knowledge is always key. Knowledge is always key. So any other tips that you can give beginners in terms of testing? We've covered this. Make sure you test your top off water. Make sure you test your new salt water. Make sure you test the water change water and so forth. Right, Mike? I mean, test pretty much everything.
Yeah, particularly I can't stress this because no one ever stresses it. The water that you're putting in through your RODI unit, a lot of municipalities I have found put different chemicals in at different times of the year, and they don't tell you. I've had 3 or 4 good friends wipe out significant portions of their tank because they suddenly put in some new compound into the water, and it basically overwhelmed the RODI unit very quickly. And as a result, they lost their corals. And when they called the municipalities, they found this. When they did their ICP test on their RO water, they found out that it was overwhelmed. There was some compound in there that was causing problems. One of them had cadmium, which should never be in drinking water, and it had overwhelmed their RODI unit. Another one was the, what's the word I want?
Chloramine? Chloramine.
Yeah. That overwhelmed their RODI unit, and basically the high amount of chlorine that was in there made their RO membrane become brittle and useless. And as a result, they lost a significant number of corals as well. So you have to test everything. And if you have a friendly municipal authority, you can contact them and ask them to put them on, have them put you on their email list as when they change what they're putting in their water, because they do change it season to season. So like around here, there's typically a lot of phosphates in the water here because I live where there's a lot of farms. A lot of the water runs off with the fertilizer. If you're not taking out all the phosphate, all of a sudden you get this massive algae bloom. You can't figure out why, and it may not show up in your phosphate test kit.
So
because
know
the
your
algae are consuming it so fast, they just take off.
know your municipality, and at the end of the day, you're make sure you keep an eye on the RODI water. There's some handy dandy TDS meters that you can plug into the RODI water filtration system, and they give you a reading. The Hydros controller also has now an upcoming. Actually, we're going to be releasing it in the next few days. You can buy it online at CoralVue.com. Is a TDS meter that you can attach to the Hydros controller, and it'll keep track of the TDS readings on your RODI water and send you a notification if the TDS goes above a certain number. So not only it automates the process, because I know that right now, unless you're actually looking and pushing the button, you really don't know what the TDS meter reading is.
That's a really good idea. I didn't even know that was coming. No, I use a handheld TDS meter every time I make up new water. And anytime it goes over 4, I know it's time to change out the resin and change out the membrane now. So I'm changing out my membranes every 2 or 3 months. I went on eBay and bought 10 membranes. So they were relatively inexpensive and just easy to do. And I mean, I'm running a 7-chamber RODI unit. So, I mean, I take having pure water very seriously, because I have had problems with tanks in the past when the water wasn't very pure.
Yeah. So again, and you know what, the TDS meter comes with 2 readings, one reading is the one that you would put at the end, at the output of the RODI unit, to know your actual output water, and the other one, the other probe, you can put it either at the beginning of the water before the RODI unit to know what the water quality of your city is, or you can put it after the sediment and the carbon to know when you have to change the sediment and the carbon, or you can place it right after your RO membrane to see if you need to change your membrane. That gives you the option. But the number 1 probe, you should always put it at the output of your RODI unit to know what is going on. So yeah, it keeps automated. It's actually kind of handy and very dandy little thing. Now, we do have a new offer going on for CoralVue right now, and is if you order a full IceCap RODI unit, you'll get it'll come with ICP testing, free ICP testing as well. I know RODI units are a big thing, and if you're a newbie, everything starts with water. That is your foundation. If your water is clean, then most likely everything will be fine. If you start with dirty water, with high phosphates or silicates, then you're going to have problems like algae. So always make sure that you're using good RODI water. Right, Mike?
One other last aspect of testing that I've gotten really aggressive with in the last 18 months is pH of the tank. For a long time, the pH in my tank would never get above 7.9. On a really good day, it would get over 8.0. And no matter what I did, adding a CO2 scrubber, other things, I couldn't figure out how to get it or how to improve it. And as a result, my corals did not grow as fast as I had seen them grow in the past. So one of the things I've gotten aggressive with is getting the pH in the tank significantly higher. And I've done that in a number of different ways. First, and the easiest way is I've introduced fresh air into the basement where the fish tank room is. That sounds relatively simple, but even in the wintertime, I open up the window, I put cloth underneath the window to keep the cold air out, but it allows enough fresh air to come in without it being particularly cold, that it doesn't cool the tank, but it allows fresh, low CO2 air in. When I say low, around 425 CO2 level. Correct. The other thing I did is I went on Amazon and bought a room CO2 monitor. It cost about $45, and it's amazing what a difference having a CO2 meter in the room does exactly for letting you know what the impact is going to be on your pH. If it goes above 800, which a lot of the time it was before I knew what I was doing, I could never get the pH up above 8.0. Now I keep it around 400 or 500 in the room. And while that sounds good, there's other things you have to do. One, I have air stones in all my overflow pipes coming down. So I'm blowing across that to drive the CO2 that's in the water going into the sump off. But I also now run my skimmers drier and with as much air as they could possibly do. What that has meant is I've had to raise the skimmers up higher than I did in the past. And I have the water level lower in the skimmers. And by doing that, by adding more air, I also have a measure for how much air is being taken into the skimmers. I've been able to get the pH to up to 8.4 or 8.5. Above 8.5
Wow.
has been thought to be dangerous. But now that I've gotten it in 8.4, 8.5, and it only drops down to 8.0 or 8.1 at night, which never happened before. It was the inverse. I would get to 8.0 during the day, and it would stay at 7.7 at night. Corals has improved significantly. I'm not having to add Kalkwasser. I'm not having to run a CO2 scrubber. I'm not having to do anything really expensive to change it. Just running the air stones off an air pump. And I also have a fan that blows across the surface of the water, which adds to the amount of low CO2 air intermixing with the water in the tank. All that has allowed me to get my pH in the tank up significantly.
Well, moral of the story, people, you got to test. But, you know, he didn't get to know that unless he tested, unless he saw what was going on with the pH. He didn't know pH corals were not growing or growing until he tested, and he figured out that, hey, my corals are growing right now because my pH is high and other things. So you got to create that baseline. Mike, always great to talk to you, man. We always learn a bunch. I mean, it's always fun, and like I said before at the beginning of the show, you make it so simple that anybody can understand it, and we always appreciate that.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. And as always, if you need to contact me or ask questions, I'm always on Facebook.
Yes, thank you. So thank you again for watching. We are streaming still live from Facebook and YouTube, CoralVue CVtv show. My name is Carlos, and my guest host today is Mike Paletta, expert from a long time, and person that, you know, we love having in here, makes everything simple. You know, if you like what you saw, if you want to see new shows, please subscribe. Please hit that bell button or hit that little like, and let us know that you like it. And then you'll be notified right away that you want, whenever we go live. I'd like to say thank you to April, our producer. I want to say thank you also to Jeremy, our graphic designer. Also, thank you to Dave and Brandy, owners of CoralVue, and make this happen. On behalf of CoralVue, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Mike Paletta, we thank you very much, and we hope to see you next time. Until then.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.